Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. Your mouse, keyboard, joystick, gamepad and other input devices allow you to interact with the game that you play. So when you press a button, then you want that the game responds to that input as fast as possible, so that the game feels responsive. Now, it would be ideal to have no delay at all, so that when you press the firing button on your input device, you instantly see that the gun on your screen starts to fire. But that is sadly not possible. So what is affecting the delay between the button and the pixel? Every input device has a polling rate, which defines how many updates it can send per second. So at a polling rate of 125, the mouse can send an update every 8 milliseconds. And at 1000, it's an update every millisecond. Gaming mice usually offer a polling rate of at least 500, which means that an update can be sent every 2 milliseconds. And the software of these mice usually allow you to choose the polling rate that you want to use. These numbers are for devices that use an USB cable. If you use a wireless device, then the delays will be higher. So once the signal reaches your PC or console, the operating system will pick it up and then make it available to the game, which will then process the input, and that means that the next delay is coming from the CPU. Once the game is done with the calculations, your GPU or graphics card needs to render a new image, which will again take some time. When the image has been rendered, then it's ready to be sent to the display. So if you play at 30 frames per second, then you get a new frame every 33 milliseconds. At 60 frames per second, it's a new frame every 16 milliseconds, and at 120, it's every 8 milliseconds. Now, if the input data is 1 millisecond late, then it's possible that you will miss that frame transmission, which means that you have to wait for the next one, and that will add an additional 33, 16 or 8 milliseconds to the input lag. If you use VSync, then this will fix the tearing issue, but it will add an additional delay to the transmission of the image from the graphics card to the display. And once the image reaches the display response time will add a few more milliseconds to the input lag. So that's the button to pixel or input lag in layman's terms. Now, how do you measure it? Some time ago I came across an article at blurbusters.com about the G-Sync technology from Nvidia, and they came up with a pretty nice method to measure the input lag. What we need is a high-speed camera. Mine can record 1200 frames per second. Then we need a gaming monitor which can run at 144 Hz and has a very low response time. Also required is an USB gaming mouse which provides a polling rate of 1000. Now, to measure the time between pressing the left mouse button and the display showing the response to that action, I connected an LED directly to the left mouse button. This means that when you press it, the LED will light up almost instantly. So if I record this with an high-speed camera, then I can count the frames between the point where the LED lights up and where I see that the gun starts to fire on the display. So after a lot of tests in Battlefield 4, I found out that if you play on a monitor with 60 Hz and let the game run at 60 frames per second, then you get an input lag of 56.9 milliseconds. If you increase the frame rate of the game to 144, then the input lag decreases by nearly 10 milliseconds, even though the monitor still runs at a refresh rate of 60 Hz. This happens because the client physics update faster now, as they are linked to your frame rate. So we get less delay now before the action starts. And if we increase the refresh rate of the monitor from 60 to 144 Hz, then the input lag gets reduced by another 5 milliseconds. Which means that compared to 60 Hz and 60 frames per second, it's about 15 milliseconds faster. Now, what happens if we enable VSync to get rid of tearing? If we do that on a 60 Hz monitor, which is the most common monitor out there, then the frame rate gets locked to 60 and synchronized with the refresh cycle of the monitor. This synchronization will increase the input lag from 56.9 milliseconds to 112 milliseconds. This is a massive increase and a very long delay that I personally don't want to have when I play a fast-paced game. I rather have the tearing instead, which I honestly don't even notice anymore when playing at 120 frames per second on a 60 Hz monitor. So VSync is not good for something like first-person shooters and racing games, but there is a solution, which is called adaptive sync, which basically means that the refresh rate of your monitor is adjusted dynamically so that it matches the frame rate, which will also eliminate the tearing issue, but without adding as much delay as VSync does. AMD calls this feature FreeSync and Nvidia calls it G-Sync. Basically, these technologies work the same way, but there are a few differences which of course make them incompatible. This means that Nvidia cards won't work with FreeSync monitors, and AMD cards won't work with G-Sync monitors. This leaves you with a difficult choice, because if you buy an FreeSync monitor, then you have to stick to AMD graphics cards for as long as you want to use that feature on that monitor. And you won't throw away that monitor when you buy a new graphics card, because currently both G-Sync and FreeSync support nearly doubles the price of your gaming monitor. Now, AMD's FreeSync uses the adaptive sync feature that is part of the open DisplayPort 1.2a standard. This means that every monitor that supports that DisplayPort standard potentially also supports FreeSync. However, just like G-Sync, it also requires special hardware to be inbuilt into the monitor. So when you buy a monitor that supports DisplayPort 1.2a, then this does not automatically mean that it will also support FreeSync, as it requires additional hardware. So will Nvidia ever support DisplayPort 1.2a and adaptive sync? Well, currently not even the Nvidia GTX 900 series supports that DisplayPort standard, and Nvidia said that the reason why they decided to build their own solution in form of G-Sync was that they were not happy with adaptive sync. They obviously spend a lot of time and money on developing G-Sync and establishing the brand, so I would not be surprised if Nvidia continues to ignore adaptive sync and will require you to buy a G-Sync monitor instead. What might be a factor in this, well, war is the price of the monitors. For a monitor to be able to support G-Sync, it needs special hardware provided by Nvidia. This is different for FreeSync, where companies like Realtek, Novatech and MStar have already signed up to build FreeSync modules. This is possible because it uses the open DisplayPort 1.2a standard. This means that FreeSync monitors could eventually become cheaper than G-Sync monitors. Now back to the test results. The values that I provided so far are from Battlefield 4 in the CTE, running on a server that uses a tick rate of 30 Hz. I did repeat the test when the server was running at a tick rate of 60 Hz, and there was no difference in the input lag. So the tick rate does not affect the input lag in Battlefield 4. Now, how good or bad is the input lag in Battlefield 4 compared to other games, at a refresh rate of 144 Hz and 144 frames per second? Battlefield 2 has an input lag of 48.5 milliseconds. In Counter-Strike Global Offensive it's 27.5 milliseconds, and in GTA 5 it's 50.6 milliseconds when you are in the first person mode. So Counter-Strike sets the bar quite high, or maybe low in this case. So DICE might be able to reduce the input lag in Battlefield 4 or in one of the upcoming games a bit more, as there's definitely room for improvement. You can also get the delay a bit lower by simply running the game at an even higher frame rate than 144, or try to use game-specific config changes, which in most cases means that you have to edit a config file. So for these tests I didn't dive into the game-specific details and focused on the delay that every user can get out of the box without specific knowledge of the game's config settings. Now, what can you do when you feel that the game is not responsive enough? First of all, make sure that the game runs at the maximum refresh rate of your display device. If you have a 144 Hz monitor, then you will not benefit from that high rate when the game uses 1080p at 60 Hz. To be able to use such high rates like 120 and 144 Hz, you have to either use a DisplayPort or dual link DVI cable. So if you are not able to get those rates, then it's possible that you use the wrong cable. Then you should check if there's a config software for your mouse which allows you to choose the polling rate, where a higher rate means less delay. And you should always try to maintain a stable 60 frames per second to ensure that the game feels responsive. If your system is powerful enough, then you could even try to go for higher frame rates, which will further reduce the input lag even on a 60 Hz monitor. And it's really worth to decrease some of the graphic options of the game in order to increase your frame rate, as you will get used to downgraded graphics, but not to the game being clunky. If you want to invest in new hardware, then I would first try to make sure that you can maintain those 60 or 120 frames per second, which means that you might need a new graphics card and or CPU. If your system already manages to maintain those frame rates, then I would look into a decent gaming mouse that supports a polling rate of 500 or 1000 updates per second. And if you have that already, then the last step is to get a gaming monitor that can do 144 Hz and has a display response time of 1 millisecond. If tearing is bothering you, then you should also consider to either go for a FreeSync or a G-Sync monitor, as V-Sync just adds way too much delay. I also want to thank my incredible fans for their support. Without you, I would not have been able to do the tests that were required for this video, and I have already done a few other tests that will be part of one of the next videos. Your support showed me how much you appreciate the work that I did here in the past, and it's what keeps me going for the future, even if I have to do 100 tests in order to get conclusive data, which takes forever and it is a tedious process. So thanks again guys, I'm really grateful for your help. So if you have any further questions, then please leave them in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.